Hello, welcome back to my channel and another reaction video. This time we continue in the Antares Confederacy. This is part 3.
On June 23rd, 341 AL, the Confederate Republics of Antares formally withdrew from its military alliance with the Cloister of the Spirits, and the pact was dissolved. Diplomats from both nations worked to mitigate the damage of such a transition, but the legacy of division, tension, and wars of dubious merit that the pact left behind would take decades to heal. But now free to pursue its own foreign policy without entanglement, the Antares Confederacy embarked on a campaign of reconciliation. Despite the war that had divided them, their conflict had brought a kind of mutual respect between the Confederacy and the Kalar clans, and it was here that the first attempt at detente were made. A normalization of relations with the Anthorian and Beldros Empire was also attempted, but their respective regimes showed little interest.
That's a dope shot.
For all its willingness to forgive past transgressions and forge new ties, few states neighboring the Antares Confederacy showed any sign of the same. Yet, with the threat of war on multiple fronts easing, the Confederacy could again devote significant resources to exploration and discovery. Since the CAS Earhart had crossed beyond the boundaries of the Antares system, the region of space the Confederacy settled had provided far more questions than answers. First among these was the nature of the Banthurians. It was doubtless their race had once been a formidable civilization capable of great works, but their fire had long since gone out of the universe. What remained was a collection of decrepit space stations clinging to the orbits of dead worlds. Each was home to hundreds of millions of Banthurians, living in squalor and governed only by whatever gang or petty tyrant could seize power. An endless string of civil wars, revolutions, coups, and insurgencies left their small region of space a chaotic battleground, and one that had been forever restricted to the Confederacy since its discovery nearly a century earlier. In 356 AL, after nearly 20 years of tests and refinements, the CAS Rofan successfully completed the Confederacy's first warp jump. Using a new method of faster-than-light travel, altogether different from the wormhole gates utilized by the Earhart flotilla or the cosmic strings navigated by modern-day vessels, the Rofan was able to circumnavigate Banthurian space. It emerged on the far side of their territory, but the mystery of their fall only deepened. Sites of ancient battles against some terrible foe littered the star systems of that distant territory. At its center was a machine construct of unfathomable power, performing some automated duty above any understanding. Elsewhere in the Confederacy,
Is that the same thing we saw at the
was studied in more detail.
the GTU videos?
At the time of its
They
discovery,
faced some ancient machine that
as
was
yet another
doing
barren
shit.
world without the environment
I
or
don't know.
resources to warrant any consideration of permanent settlement. Even among the growing multitude of species that now made up the Confederacy's citizens, none were amenable to its thin atmosphere and soil. The only presence on Lideco had been a monitoring station used during the war against the Anthorians and a small research outpost. It was during the expansion of the latter site that an unprecedented discovery was made. Buried beneath shifting sands and broken by the weight of time was a tomb. It was a mammoth complex so large that even the great underground cities of the Tanali Republic would have been lost within their depths. The complexity and scale of the structure seemed beyond the ability of all but the most elder of starfaring races, though to whom it had once belonged, could not be ascertained. For months, an ever-growing team of researchers and scientists from across the whole of the Confederacy descended on Lideco, mapping out its vast labyrinth and working to unlock its hidden vaults. What they discovered within the deepest levels of the structure, sealed behind ancient doors and eldritch puzzles, was a single corpse. It was remarkably well preserved within the structure, but it resembled no species known to exist across the wider galaxy. Yet covering the walls, floors, and ceilings that adorned its mausoleum was a script instantly recognizable. The language had long since died out, but such was its importance that dozens of species across the galaxy could trace the evolution of their own alphabets to this one. Whoever this creature had once been, he had influenced the fate of great interstellar nations long before humanity discovered fire. Recognizing its importance, the Confederacy sent an envoy to the Vran. They were among the oldest species ever encountered, and it was to their language that the runes used within the crypt most resembled. Like the Bantherians, the Vran had once been a great power in the universe, only to have suffered some cataclysm and locked themselves away behind their borders. Even so, they remained hundreds, if not thousands of years more advanced than the other species of the galaxy, and regarded the younger races with annoyance and condescension.
How long
In a
till they
departure
get
from their
destroyed?
typical dismissive rhetoric, however, representatives from the Vran state appeared before the Antares Parliament. They praised the Confederacy and requested the return of the body discovered in the tomb of Ledeco. The Confederate delegation that accompanied the remains to the throne world of the Vran were the first outsiders to set foot upon its surface in millennia. They were honored, blessed, and profoundly thanked. To the Vran, the figure within the vault had been a messianic figure, and to achieve in finding him where they themselves had failed, the Confederacy was seen as divinely inspired. A plethora of gifts were bestowed to the Confederate envoys, with one among their number reserved solely for the Prime Minister of Antares. While the Confederacy enjoyed an age of enlightenment and opportunity, the frontiers around it grew turbulent. In the absence of the Moya Pact, renewed conflict had broken out between the Cloister of the Spirits and the Anthorian Empire, with the latter collapsing into anarchy as the conflict wore on. The failure of the Anthorian state led to an enormous refugee crisis, and the Confederate border posts were overwhelmed with requests for asylum. Amidst this worsening crisis, the Confederacy itself suffered tragedy when a solar flare nearly wiped out one of its newest colonies. Despite a tremendous evacuation effort, not enough ships could be mobilized in time, and tens of thousands were killed. What historians would refer to as the Golden Age had ended. When the first changes in Bantherian society were observed by frontier outposts and reconnaissance satellites in 377, Confederate intelligence failed to recognize its importance until it was too late. Through diplomacy and brutal cunning, a single warlord had emerged within their decaying civilization and rallied the disparate gangs, tribes, and holdouts to his cause. His title was beyond translation. To Antares, he was simply known as the Great Khan. Within days of his ascension, the once isolationist Bantherian race exploded outwards from their enclave, seizing star systems from all those around them. The destruction of Naval Station Koloa was a shock to all Antares. The fortress had been specifically designed to deter the Bantherians, only to be relentlessly attacked in a series of engagements that had also crippled 2 Confederate fleets sent to reinforce it. When the fleets of the Khan arrived in orbit of Prithvi, site of the nearest Antares colony of Malacca, nothing could be done to save it. After 2 years of constant defeats, the loss of nearly all its frontier territories bordering the Khan, and its single largest colony in the region, the Parliament of Antares, began discussing the possibility of surrender. Despite the violence and suffering he had unleashed, in his actions on Prithvi and elsewhere, the Khan had shown himself to be reasonable, and capable of acting with a kind of warrior's honor. The Confederacy was militarily shattered, and the road now open to the heart of the nation. Servitude under the Khan, it was argued, might be seen as preferable to extinction. But the heroic actions of General Liliana Reyes, who had led the doomed last stand on Malacca, had revitalized the martial fire of Antares, which now burned with a deadly heat. For the first time since the liberation of Torix, hundreds of thousands, then millions, rallied behind a single great effort. Where before humanity had sallied forth alone, now it marched in tandem with the Vrul, the Numa, the Tavorites, the Anoran, the Kelar, the Bruggan, the Othonian, and dozens of others. Each species had come to Antares for different reasons, but each now saw in the Confederacy an ideal worth fighting for. As the Khanate pushed further into both the Confederacy and distant territories, a counterattack was mobilized. With the Khan himself occupied elsewhere, Antares struck. The campaign to liberate Malacca cut through what little defenses had been left in orbit, and after heavy fighting, the system was once again in Confederate hands. It was a defining moment, but even the growing strength of Antares could not hope to match the armadas commanded by the Khan. The ships that emerged within the Antares system never appeared on any form of tracking instrument. Not until their great forms loomed outside the windows of Reunion Station had it been realized that they were even present. Their commander materialized before the Confederate High Command with almost no warning, and shock turned to relief as it unsheathed its ancient crystalline sword and pledged the services of the Vran Pilgrims. With the forces of the Vran at the vanguard of the Confederacy's counterattack, the scope of the offensive was expanded.
I guess finding the tomb or whatever and returning the body
news that the Khan had been defeated by some
gave them some
elsewhere in the
points, and now
universe.
the Vran help.
The hope that this might lead to the end of the war was soon quashed when it was confirmed the Great Khan himself had escaped. The myth of the Khan's invincibility had been shattered, but only heightened his desire for renewed conquests. 11 years after their initial invasion, the Banthurian Khanate again turned its attention towards Antares, this time with the Khan at their head. The Second Battle of Prithvi was beyond anything in human history. Confederate fleets were hastily organized and assembled from across the disparate counteroffensives in the frontier, massing for a single battle that would decide the fate of the nation. Failure here, and nearly a decade of effort would be wasted. The first time the Banthurians had arrived in Prithvi, they had faced only token resistance in orbit. In the year 390, the entire might of the Confederate Navy had been assembled. Banthurian warships traded salvos with ancient Vran battlecruisers, and against their eldritch power, even the Khan could not prevail. The destruction
Will
of
he escape a king or
scattered
be
the
destroyed
remainder of
this time?
forces, which were quickly picked apart by Confederate battle groups. The death of the Khan threw his Khanate into chaos, and this was exploited to the fullest by the Confederacy. As rival warlords jostled for positions, their star systems were systematically captured one by one. Decades of half measures undertaken against the Anthorians and Beldros, combined with the trauma left over from the occupation of Prithvi, had left their mark on the Confederate leadership. Antares would settle for nothing less than total victory. In 395 AL, the Banthurian Khanate surrendered. The Antares Confederacy had taken not only the former enclave on its frontiers, but pursued the expansion of the Khanate through a natural, stable wormhole within their territory. For the first time, Confederate ships had operated in a distant part of the galaxy and brought the weight of their forces to bear against the last distant holdouts of the Khan. As part of the Banthurian instrument of surrender, their nation-state was preserved, but a new government acceptable to Confederate officials was installed, democratic reforms implemented, and limits placed on the role of their military. The war against the Khan had pushed the Confederacy past its traditional limits towards a new policy of heightened militarism and increased interventionism. A new vision began to emerge of the role Antares could play in spreading peace and democracy across the galaxy, and whether it even possessed the right to do so. Much of the Confederacy's population could trace their heritage within Antares back to refugees fleeing from neighboring states, and there came a desire to bring to bear the might that had shattered the Khan to liberate their own ancestral homelands. First among these was Earth. The last gift from the Vran, the one reserved for the eyes of the Prime Minister alone, was in fact a warning. It was then shared with the growing cadre of officials privy to the discussions taking place at the highest levels of government. Every fear was confirmed, and new details revealed that ended any hope of a peaceful reunification with the rest of humanity. During the war against the Khan had come the news of his first defeat against some great distant power. Through the Vran, that power was given a name. The time had finally come for the rest of Antares to learn the truth.
Don't end. God damn it. Yep. That's a cool shot. Well, there you have it, folks. Part 3, and okay. So now the Antares Confederacy finally knows about Earth, and all because the Great Khan suffered a defeat because of some distant power. So sounds like, I mean, we had a Great Khan in the Greater Terran Union, but yeah. So now Antares finally. Now they know about Earth, but it didn't seem like it's going to be a happy reunion. Definitely. And yeah, Earth has dealt with a lot of Eldritch species in the past, so I don't know if the Ran can, even with the Ran's help, can they beat Earth if there's a conflict. But yeah, this was really good, and yeah, the ending was. On one hand, I did hate the ending, but yeah, it's a brilliant way to end. Makes you want to watch the next one right away. But I won't, because I've learned to and I will soon. But yeah, other than that, I mean, the beginning was mainly just focusing on. I mean, continuing what was left off. I mean, they broke the deal with their union with the Cloister of Spirits, and when their pact ended, they continued their war with the whatever empire, but the empire had been their strength had been mostly destroyed thanks to the Confederacy. So I think the spirits did fairly well. I mean, the Antares borders were filled with refugees from the empire and whatnot. And yeah, then you had a moment of peace when Antares could devote their resources to exploration and whatnot, and that's how they found the Banthurian wild space that would eventually become the Banthurian Khanate. And yeah, the Khan did a lot of damage, but then it continued to fight on more than one front, which gave the Antares the upper hand and reclaim lost territories. And then they found out about that the Khan had been defeated in a distant battlefield, and even though thanks to the Vran help they managed to defeat him once, he did come back for a second try, but yeah, the Vran were too powerful, and he was finally killed. And yeah, now we'll see what happens between Antares and Earth. I am super excited about that. Hope you enjoyed my reaction. Don't forget to like, subscribe if you want, and I will see you in another video.